Excerpt from the narrative of the captivity and restoration of Mrs. Mary Rowlandson by Mary Rowlandson. Background. Below is an excerpt from Mary Rowlandson's captivity narrative. Rowlandson was a Puritan woman living in the settlement of Lancaster in the Massachusetts Bay Colony. The narrative depicts her experience as a captive of the Native Americans during King Philip's War in 1676. Her diary describes her capture, 11-week captivity, and her return, although it was written a few years after her release. The tensions between colonists and the Native Americans, particularly in the aftermath of King Philip's War, were a source of anxiety in the colonies. While fearing losing connection to their own society, colonists were intensely curious about the experience of one who had been over the line as the captive of Native American Indians and returned to colonial society. Part 1. On the 10th of February, 1675, came the Indians with great numbers upon Lancaster. Their first coming was about sunrising. Hearing the noise of some guns, we looked out. Several houses were burning, and the smoke ascending to heaven. There were 5 persons taken in one house, the father and the mother, and a sucking child. They knocked on the head. The other 2 they took and carried away alive. There were 2 others, who being out of the garrison upon some occasion were set upon. One was knocked on the head, the other escaped. Another there was who running along was shot and wounded, and he fell down. He begged of them his life, promising them money, as they told me. But they would not hearken to him, but knocked him in the head, stripped him naked, and split open his bowels. Another, seeing many of the Indians about his barn, ventured and went out, but was quickly shot down. There were 3 others belonging to the same garrison who were killed. The Indians, getting up upon the roof of a barn, had advantage to shoot down upon them over their fortification. Thus these murderous wretches went on, burning and destroying before them. At length they came and beset our own house, and quickly it was the dolefullest day that ever mine eyes saw. Some in our house were fighting for their lives, others wallowing in their blood. The house on fire over our heads, and the bloody heathen ready to knock us on our head, if we stirred out. Now might we hear the mothers and children crying out for themselves, and one another, Lord, what shall we do? Then I took my children, and one of my sisters hers, to go forth and leave the house. But as soon as we came to the door and appeared, the Indians shot so thick that the bullets rattled against the house, as if one had taken a handful of stones and threw them, so that we were in fain to give back. We had 6 stout dogs belonging to our garrison, but none of them would stir, though another time, if any Indian had come to the door, they were ready to fly upon him and tear him down. No sooner were we out of the house, but my brother-in-law, being before wounded in defending the house, in or near the throat, fell dead, whereat the Indians scornfully shouted and hallowed and were presently upon him. Stripping him of his clothes, the bullets flying thick, one went through my side, and the same, as would seem, through the bowels and hand of my dear child in my arms. One of my elder sister's children, named William, had then his leg broken, which the Indians perceiving, they knocked him on his head. Part 2. Thus we were butchered by those merciless heathen, standing amazed with the blood running down to our heels. My eldest sister being yet in the house, and seeing those woeful sights, the infidels hauling mothers one way and children another, and some wallowing in their blood, and her elder son telling her that her son William was dead, and myself was wounded, she said, And Lord, let me lie down with them, which was no sooner said, but she was struck with a bullet, and fell down dead over the threshold. Oh, the doleful sight that now was to behold at this house! Of 37 persons who were in this one house, none escaped either present death or bitter captivity, save only one who might say as he, and I only am escaped alone to tell the news. Job 1:15. There were 12 killed, some shot, some stabbed with their spears, some knocked down with their hatchets. When we were in prosperity, oh, the little that we think of such dreadful sights. and to see our dear friends and relations lie bleeding out their heart blood upon the ground. There was one who was chopped into the head with a hatchet and stripped naked, and yet was crawling up and down. It's a solemn sight to see so many Christians lying in their blood, some here and some there, like a company of sheep torn by wolves, all of them stripped naked by a company of hellhounds, roaring, singing, ranting, and insulting, as if they would have torn out our very hearts. Yet the Lord, by his mighty power, preserved a number of us from death, for there were 24 of us taken alive and carried captive. I had often before this said that if the Indians should come, I should choose rather to be killed by them than taken alive. But when it came to the trial, my mind changed. Their glittering weapons so daunted my spirit that I chose rather to go along with those, as I may say, ravenous beasts, than that moment to end my days, and that I may the better declare what happened to me during this grievous captivity. I shall particularly speak of the several removes we had up and down the wilderness. Part 3. But now, the next morning, I must turn my back upon the town and travel with them into the vast and desolate wilderness. I knew not whither. It is not my tongue or pen can express the sorrows of my heart and bitterness of my spirit that I had at this departure. But God was with me in a wonderful manner, carrying me along and bearing up my spirit, that it did not quite fail. One of the Indians carried my poor wounded babe upon a horse. It went moaning all along, "I shall die, I shall die." I went on foot after it, with sorrow that could not be expressed. At length I took it off the horse and carried it in my arms till my strength failed, and I fell down with it. Then they set me upon a horse with my wounded child in my lap, and there being no furniture upon the horse's back, as we were going down a steep hill, we both fell over the horse's head, at which they, like inhumane creatures, laughed and rejoiced to see it, though I thought we should there have ended our days, as overcome with so many difficulties. But the Lord renewed my strength still, and carried me along, that I might see more of his power. Yea, so much that I could never have thought of had I not experienced it. After this, it quickly began to snow, and when night came on, they stopped, and now down. I must sit in the snow by a little fire, and a few boughs behind me with my sick child in my lap, and calling much for water, being now, through the wound, fallen into a violent fever, my own wound also growing so stiff that I could scarce sit down or rise up. Yet so it must be, that I must sit all this cold winter night upon the cold snowy ground, with my sick child in my arms, looking at every hour would be the last of its life, and having no Christian friend near me, either to comfort or to help me. Section 5. The first week of my being among them, I hardly ate anything. The second week, I found my stomach grow very faint for want of something, and yet it was very hard to get down their filthy trash. But the third week, though I could think how formerly my stomach would turn against this or that, and I could starve and die before I could eat such things, yet they were sweet and savory to my taste. I was at this time knitting a pair of white stockings for my mistress, and had not yet wrought upon a Sabbath day. When the Sabbath came, they bade me to go to work, and I told them it was the Sabbath day, and desired them to let me rest, and told them I would do as much more tomorrow. To which they answered me they would break my face. And here I cannot but take notice of the strange providence of God in preserving the heathen. They were many hundreds, old and young, some sick and some lame. Many had papooses at their back. The greatest number at this time with us were squaws, and they traveled with all they had, bag and baggage. And yet they got over this river aforesaid, and on Monday they set their wigwams on fire, and away they went. On that very day came the English army after them to this river, and saw the smoke of their wigwams, and yet this river put a stop to them, God did not give them the courage or activity to go over after us. We were not ready for so great a mercy as victory and deliverance. If we had been, God would have found out a way for the English to have passed this river, as well as for the Indians with their squaws and children and all their luggage.